there are also parents who are enabling their children to live in delusion, which can be and often is just as dangerous and just as deadly as an overly authoritarian parent. California is letting its stance be known very clearly. Schools now have primacy in raising your children. This became crystal clear when the Attorney General for the state opened an investigation into Chino Hills School District for a new policy pertaining to parental rights. So, what is this wild, crazy, outlandish, dastardly policy that requires the Attorney General to get involved? Here it is. Chino Hills no longer allows its adults to keep children's secrets from parents. While this may seem like a policy that's based on common sense and something you would expect all schools to follow, that is no longer the case in California. We are going to pull up and look at a local newscast from the Los Angeles area, and they'll tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Now at 11, a very heated Chino Valley School Board meeting tonight. Hundreds of people gathering to voice their opinions about a controversial parent notification policy. The meeting getting hostile after a brief exchange between the school board president and state school superintendent Tony Thurmond. Thurmond escorted out by security. The hours-long meeting had dozens of people expressing their opinions during public comment on the policy that would require schools to notify parents if their child identifies as transgender or wants to use a different bathroom. Eyewitness News reporter Amy Powell has more on tonight's raucous school board.
So there we go. Now, I'm going to pull up, this is the Attorney General of California's website, just so it's not like, look, I just get the best articles that I can, and sometimes they're from really far left-leaning publications, and sometimes they're from right-leaning publications, but whatever just reads the best and gets the facts out the best, just so no one can like claim, that this is some crazy, right-wing or left-wing conspiracy. This is from a .gov website. This is the Attorney General of California, oag.ca.gov. Attorney General launches civil rights investigation into Chino Valley Unified's policy of forced gender status disclosure. Now, one of the things that politicians are really good at, and I tend to feel like on the left of politics, they are quite a bit better than the right. They're really, really good with words. There's a book I read several years ago. I think it's called Words That Win or something like that. And it's from the guy who was behind, George Bush's campaign. I think he also was a consultant on Bill Clinton's campaign. And he just was like, if you want to win, you want to get a winning message, you got to get your words right. And they're so good at controlling words. And so what do they call it? A forced gender status disclosure. They're going to use some other words that I think are very specifically used. California Attorney General Rob Bonta today announced opening a civil rights investigation into potential legal violations by the Chino Valley Unified School District, which adopted a policy that forces schools to out students whose gender identities may be changing. Okay, so there's another, you have to out them, which sounds like you're going to take a picture of them or put a sandwich board on them and stand them on a milk carton and shame them in front of everyone. What they're actually saying is if a student tells you in secret they're making a life-changing decision, you got to tell the parents, right? That's all it actually is. So this may out students. Enacted in July, the parental notification policy requires schools to inform parents with minimal exceptions whenever a student requests to use a name or pronoun different from that on their birth certificate or official records, even if such disclosure is against the student's wishes or could expose a student to parental abuse or increase the risk of self-harm or suicide. We'll go back to that. The policy also requires notification if a student accesses facilities or participates in programs that don't align with their sex on official records. Attorney General sent a letter last month to superintendent and the Board of Education emphasizing the potential infringements on students' civil and privacy rights and educational opportunities. So you could out them, right? This is always the danger when it comes to conversations of gender, is that this could lead to harm or suicide. This could lead to abuse. Now, that is already covered. If you have abusive parents at all, and you live in the United States of America, you are required federally by law to notify CPS if you believe a child is in danger. You already have to do that. So if there is a parent who you said, hey, your kid's struggling with gender identity, or your kid is asking to use the girls' locker room, even though on his official transcripts it says that he's a male, if that child, or if that child is going to be in actual physical danger because of that, you have another issue with the parents. That has nothing to do with this, right? And what we often do in political conversations is we argue to the anomalies. We do this all of the time, right? When you have the abortion conversation with people, what everyone wants to talk about are the less than 2%, somewhere around 1% of incidences where the life of the mother is at risk, or where there was an episode of incest, or where there was rape. They want to talk about the 1%, but really the 1% is an obfuscation, because they actually aren't going to budge on the abortion issue at all. They just want to argue from the extremes, or they want to argue from the area of most emotion. And so what we should create policies around is just normal parents. And how this would read if it wasn't cloaked in political language is, we have a new policy at our school that we're not going to keep secrets from parents.
Wow.
That's it. And to make the opposite argument, which the Attorney General is making, is we believe that your student, who is your child, should be able to go to a teacher or the librarian or their counselor or their vice principal, and they should be able to share secrets, and that secret is now going to be kept from the parent. That's the argument. And that is a bad argument. That is a really bad, really dangerous policy. And you're beginning to hear people talk about our kids, and the educators are beginning to talk at the highest levels, like at the level of their unions, about how these are our children. And they're just not. They're not your children. They belong to their parents. This has been the way that things have worked forever. And for people who are not parents, you might not have the same level of just visceral reaction to this. But if you are a parent and your daughter is now using the men's locker room, your daughter is now using the male restrooms, your daughter is now changing her name and her pronouns and identifying differently, the idea that you don't have a right as their parent to know that is simply outlandish. It's like, how are we at a place where I even have to make an argument for this? This just seems like so much common sense. And to posit the parents as the enemy of the children, when it is the parents' primary responsibility to raise their kids, to discipline their kids. And here's what good parents do. In a loving way, they always help their kids line up with reality. Because when someone is living in opposition to reality, they are living in, number one, an untenable way, but they're living in a way that is going to create massive anxiety, that is going to spiral them into depression, that is going to potentially cause a mental break at some point, because you can't fight reality. It's like gravity. Gravity is just there. You know, I can remember being like 7 and wanting to fly so bad. You know, I loved Superman, the idea that I could just fly. I remember we lived in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was a weird kid, you know, and I just like, I had high hopes. I still have high hopes, very optimistic. And I can remember being in my backyard and just thinking, if I just believe this hard enough, you know, I am just going to Peter Pan right out of this backyard. I don't know what my plan was after that, you know, like, I don't know where I was going to fly. I didn't know directions. I barely knew like where our house was in the city. But man, if I just believe, like, my parents were going to look out the window and, is that Clayton flying around the neighborhood? I thought it could really happen, and it couldn't. And gravity lined me back up to reality, right? Still to this point, I've never flown. Odds are, never will. And reality matters. And especially for young people, they can get distanced from reality very, very quickly. And when that happens, they put themselves in a very dangerous position. It has been the understanding throughout all of human history that, you know, there are definitely in more village-centered, communal-centered Eastern communities, the idea that everyone raises your kids, you know, everyone, like I've spent a lot of time in Haiti. Anyone can spank your kid in Haiti. Your kid's acting up, they might get spanked by anyone, you know, and anyone might feed your kid. You know, if they're hungry, they might get fed by the neighbor, and everybody knows each other. That's a really beautiful communal thing. But everybody understands that the rights and the responsibility to that kid ultimately end with the parent. And that's always been understood. And it's certainly understood in scripture. In Proverbs, the very first chapter, it says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck." Now, are there bad parents? Absolutely. Are there abusive parents? Yes. Are there authoritarian parents? Yes. There are also parents who are enabling their children to live in delusion, which can be and often is just as dangerous and just as deadly as an overly authoritarian parent. So we're not going to argue from the anomalies. We're not going to argue from the most fringe, emotion-laden position. We're going to argue from the median. We're going to argue from the norm. Good parents who love their kids and are trying to do the best. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it." The entire corpus of scripture assumes, when it gives instructions like this, that these instructions are to the parents. They're not to the teacher. They're not to the babysitter. They're not even to the high school football coach. They are to the parents. It is a parent's job. And one of the things that's happening is parents are abdicating their responsibility to raise their kids to the other professionals around them. And so the educators get to teach them every single thing about how the world works, even though the education system is really teaching you how to pass tests usually, and not actually how to grow in knowledge and wisdom. Parents aren't talking to their kids much. They're certainly not talking about the basic fundamental realities of life. They're not instilling correct ideology or correct belief systems. Even Christian parents are often just abdicating the spiritual growth and responsibility to the spiritual professionals, the youth pastors and the preacher on Sunday and the Sunday school teachers. Like, the buck stops with you and how you're going to raise your kid and how you're going to line them up to reality. Ephesians 6 actually echoes the 10 Commandments and says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother," which is the first commandment that also has a promise attached to it, so that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the land. Parents raise their kids, and you need to be aware of what's going on at your schools. We're in Texas. We're in a place where there's not a whole lot of crazy happening, but even here in San Antonio, there have been things happen in some of the schools around that have made the local news, and parents are just shocked, and they don't know what's going on, and they don't know what's happening with their kids, and parents deserve to know. And the very last thing that we need are teachers keeping secrets with our children from us. That is about as inappropriate of a situation as I can imagine. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Clayton Tyner podcast. If you want to watch the full podcast, you can check that out somewhere right around here. And if you want to subscribe, you can do that right over here somewhere. Also, you can follow me at Clayton Tyner. That's Tyner on Twitter and Instagram. I would love for you to subscribe to the channel so you can keep up with everything that we're doing.